Today we're going to be taking a look at my new microphone, which is the Sony ECM-77B lavalier microphone. For the last few years, my audio setup has been a Giant Squid Audio Lab lavalier microphone connected to a Zoom H2n recorder. And to be honest, it's absolutely fine, it works really well, and I'm quite happy with the sound quality. However, I recently came across an auction for this, and was able to get it really cheap, so I just decided to get it just to see what it was like. This is one of Sony's highest end lavalier microphones, and it's designed for broadcast use. In fact, as far as I can tell doing a bit of research online, this microphone is quite extensively used by the BBC and Sky, as well as many other TV networks. So it's not the sort of thing you would normally buy just for home use or for, casual hobbyist use. This is designed for professional broadcast use. Now, brand new, this microphone is extremely expensive. Looking up prices online to buy this new, you're looking at, including VAT, maybe £470 to £550, that sort of range. So around the £500 mark, which is ridiculous. Now, obviously, I could not afford to buy that myself. I would not waste that much money on just a microphone. Especially given the current microphone I'm using, the one you're hearing right now, costs probably about £40 to £50. But these are actually not too expensive on the used market. If you dig around on eBay, you can find them quite easily for around about maybe £80 to £100. They don't come up all the time, so it's the sort of thing that if you're needing to buy a microphone in a rush, this isn't particularly easy to get. But if you're happy to sort of wait a bit, it's worth setting up like an eBay search alert that'll let you know when new listings come up, or just checking every so often, and you can sometimes grab these for around about £80 to £100. Now with this I got even more fortunate than that, because there was an auction for a sound and light hire company that went out of business, and they were auctioning off all their stuff, and I had to show a lot of restraint not to buy a lot of things I didn't need. But they had this. And this was actually listed wrong. It was listed as an ECM-70, so the model number was wrong, so not as many people bid on it. And I ended up getting this for around £60, in fact £59. So that's obviously extremely cheap for a microphone like this. So £500 new, I paid £59, so definitely got a good deal on that. But I thought it'd be quite a nice little upgrade for the channel, just to get something a little bit better, and really just to play with it and see what sort of proper professional grade equipment's like versus my microphone that's a bit more consumer/prosumer. So let's take a look at it. It comes in this nice case here. It's sort of faux leather type case, a little latch on the front. If we open it up, you can see what's inside. And as you can see, we've got the microphone. There's a few different parts to this. The first part here is obviously the microphone itself, and that comes out like this. Take a look at that in a minute. Apart from that, you get a few accessories. You get a clip. Now, normally if you're buying this, you get a few different clips. I only got the one because the other ones have obviously gone missing. This one's a sort of normal clip you'd use though. It just is a standard horizontal clip, so it clips on and holds a microphone capsule sticking up like this. And that's absolutely fine. That's a normal clip you would use. If you're buying it new, you also get one that can take two microphones on it side by side, in case you wanted that. You also get one where the clip for the microphone is rotating 90 degrees, so the microphone would stick out in line with the clip. And I also saw mention of one that has a sort of safety pin type fixing. Obviously, because this is ex-hire, I imagine all the accessories have gone missing over the years it's been hired out, so all I've got is this clip, but that's the one I would use anyway. And you can buy these clips separately if you need to, and they're not too expensive on the used market. You can get them for about a tenner. You then also normally get a pop filter, a sort of little mesh one that we clip on the microphone. Unfortunately, that's missing from mine. That's more annoying because it would be quite nice to have a pop filter, but it'll do. And I've worked out I can buy this even brand new for about £20, so it's not too bad. And generally pop filters go missing anyway. I've lost many of them off my old microphone. But you don't really need it. I'm filming inside, so I don't really need it right now. Of course, as an alternative to the official Sony windshield, you can just get these cheap foam ones in massive bulk packs online. I bought this after losing many of the ones off my Giant Squid, so I just bought a giant bulk pack, so I just keep losing the things. And they're great little, just simple little foam things you can stick over the microphone. And they do work on the Sony, of course. Just slide it over the end like that, and that'll work as a windshield. The only thing I would do is just be very careful with the internal diameter, because this one here is the exact same size as the Sony, and because it's the exact same size, it's not really tight, it does just come off quite easily, so you would lose it. So I'll probably just get another pack of these, but just get one with slightly smaller internal diameter to fit the Sony better, because these ones I bought more for my other microphone, which is a bit larger. So yeah, you can get the official Sony one for about £20, which, to be fair, for an accessory for a £500 microphone, £20 isn't too bad. But you just buy a pack of these really cheap, and that'll do for now as well. So yeah, bit annoying mine didn't come with a windshield, but this will do. And it's also got space to hold a AA battery, so you can put that in there. And we'll take a look at the power separately, how it's all powered separately, because it's quite interesting with this one. And now let's take a look at the microphone itself. So now here we've got the Sony ECM-77B microphone. And as you can see, you've got this big giant thing on the end here, which is a big XLR connector. We'll take a look at that in a second. And a big long cable. I think this is about 3 meters long, so it's really long. And it actually feels quite good quality. It feels quite, it's flexible enough that it will easily move around. It's not, it's not going to get tangled or anything. It doesn't seem to tangle up too badly. I say while trying to desperately untangle it off camera. But it seems like a fairly decent cable. And it is really long, which is good. But it's not too long. You get some microphones that are just like, they have like 5-6 meter cables. They're just stupid. This isn't too bad. And then on the end of the cable, you've got the capsule itself. So that's it there. Tiny little thing. Really small. Compared to my existing microphone, you can just see how small it is. So it's a lot smaller than most lavalier microphones, which is quite good. It means if you have it exposed on the front of someone when they're filming them, it's not as big and noticeable, but it also means you can hide it a bit more. Like this is so small, you could pretty much hide it inside the seam of a shirt, like between the buttons, or in the collar of a shirt. You could really hide it because it's so small, it's really tiny. And then you've got the clip here, which can go onto that. And this clip's quite nice. It's compared to my old microphone where it just clips into like a V shape and just holds itself in and it can pop out. This one you've actually got this bit you squeeze, and there's like a little indentation ridge on the microphone itself. So you squeeze it in, slide it over, and it actually locks into that ridge, like that there. So it's really secure, like that. If someone trips and tugs it, it's not going to pull the microphone out the holder. So it definitely seems really secure. And you've got this nice little rubber bit here that grips onto clothes really nicely, so and doesn't put sharp teeth into your clothes. So it's a really nice design of clip as well. So that's what you've got for the microphone there. Now, with this microphone, I mentioned it's got this big giant XLR plug on the end here. And this is quite important because there's different versions of the ECM77 microphone. You've got the ECM77B. The B is just the colour, it's just black. I think there's also an S, which is silver. But there's a bunch of letters after that on some of them. Now, this is just the ECM77B. There's no other letters. And what that means is you've got the microphone here, and it terminates into this giant big XLR connector plug assembly thing here. Now what you'll see with this is the cable enters on the end here, and you've got an XLR plug there you can plug into your equipment. So you can plug this into an audio recorder or a mixer, or really whatever you want to feed the audio into. Now to power this, because you need to power these microphones, it can either use 48 volt phantom power, which is provided by a lot of mixers, audio interfaces and audio recorders, or you can unscrew this bit here, and you can put in a AA. So that's what that AA is for. So this is optional. If you've got a thing that provides phantom power, you don't need this. But if you're powering this in a way that doesn't require phantom power, you can pop a AA in there, close it up, and that will now power it. And that'll power this for, apparently, according to Sony, 6,000 hours, which I worked out is about 250 days. So yeah, the battery will last a long time. Now, the downside of that is there's no power indicator or on-off switch. So it means that you don't necessarily know the battery level of it. So you need to be a bit careful to make sure the battery doesn't drain too low and actually stop working. But when I bought this, it actually had this battery sitting in it. They'd left it in the microphone itself. So it would have been sitting powered on, and it's probably been like that for months because the company went bust, a months or so ago, a couple of months ago now. So this has probably been in there for a very long time. And this battery is only reading about 0.9 volts with no load on it at all. So this battery is basically dead, but it still powers it absolutely fine. So it seems like the battery life will be really good. But yeah, you can't switch it on and off, so it's worth bearing in mind if you're not going to use it for a while to actually physically take the battery out of it. And that then means you can power it from a device that doesn't have phantom power. So you can plug it into just many more devices, mixers, all that sort of stuff, if they don't provide phantom power. There was one quite important thing I saw in the manual that's related to having a battery in here. Obviously, if you have the battery in here, it permanently powers the device. And it says if you plug it into phantom power, it'll use the phantom power to power the device and not the battery. However, apparently there can be an issue if you've got a battery in here that's flat or like running low, and then you power it over phantom power, the battery can start having an adverse effect on the audio if it's a weak battery. So in that case, it's probably worth taking the battery out and just only, if you're running over phantom power, don't have a battery in here. Because what I could see being a bit of an issue, and I know it's something I would do, is put a battery in it, totally forget it's in there, and then just only use it over phantom power, forgetting there's a battery in here. And over time, as that battery degrades, it'll start impacting the audio quality that you're getting through it when you're powering over phantom power. And then you might take ages to wondering what's the problem or not even notice the fact you've got bad audio until you realise there's a dead battery in it. So yeah, it's definitely worth bearing in mind that according to the Sony manual, if you've got a dead battery in it and you're powering it over phantom power, it can have an adverse effect on the audio quality. So I think most of the time I'll just run this without a battery at all when I've got it into the interface, and then I'll put a battery in only when I'm using it without a audio interface for phantom power. But yeah, just something worth bearing in mind. So at least it's quite flexible that you can power it with both phantom power or a AA battery, depending on what your needs are. However, it's worth bearing in mind when I was talking about the different letters after the name. The one without any letters after the name, just the ECM-77B, is this one that has this big XLR power plug thing. But there's a few different options you might see if you're looking at them online, and it's worth bearing in mind what they are. So you'll see a lot of these with different letters after the model number, and they don't have this big XLR plug. Instead, they terminate the microphone itself, this cable here, in various different plugs. You'll see a few different screw-on 4-pin ones, 8-pin ones, and a 3.5mm one. Now with those, they're designed for radio microphone transmitters, and different radio microphone systems use different connectors to connect the microphone to the mic pack. So that means with those microphones, you can't really connect them to normal equipment. You need to connect them really to a radio mic transmitter. In fact, there's also one you'll see with a 3.5mm jack, but don't be fooled with that, because while it is a 3.5mm jack, and it's a stereo jack, so it's TRS, you can't plug that into a normal audio recorder or audio interface and expect it to work, because it's designed specifically for radio mic transmitters, where it'll use one of the terminals as ground, one of the terminals as the audio signal, and one of the terminals as a voltage. And that standard isn't really supported by normal audio interfaces. Those tend to use the plug-in power standard, where it sends the power over the same wire that's used for audio. So while you could get one of those and potentially modify it, you could potentially build an assembly like this, or try and rig it up to work with a plug-in power type power supply, you can't just buy those and just use them off the shelf. Especially that 3.5mm one. Don't be fooled by that and buy it and think, oh, I can just plug it into, your recorder like this. You can't. You need to use that with a radio mic transmitter or modify it. They also even sell one of these amusingly with bare wires on the end. You can just buy the ECM-77 microphone without any wires on it, without any jack connector on it at all, and it's designed to attach to your own jack based on what you're trying to connect it to. But yeah, if you want something that'll work out of the box, you would need the ECM-77B with this giant XLR plug on the end. Otherwise, you can maybe modify it yourself or try and build your own interface. Or Sony actually do sell a system where you can actually buy essentially this piece on its own, and then it has a connector on to connect one of those other microphones on, but that gets a bit more expensive than just buying the whole assembly. But yeah, when you're buying one of these, if you want it to work out the box, make sure you get this particular style. Otherwise, you'll have to have a bit of modification work to do. So now, before we get onto audio tests, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I'm going to record off of this. With my current microphone, I just use my Zoom H2n recorder, which has been ideal. I just have a little 3.5mm jack into the side of this. This provides plug-in power to the microphone to power it, around 1.5 volts, and it records perfectly. But unfortunately with this recorder, you'll notice there's no XLR jack. All it has is a 3.5mm input. So I've got a couple of options. What I think I'll do with this most of the time is I've got an audio interface on my desk, a Behringer interface, that has an XLR input, and it provides phantom power. So I think most of the time I'll just actually plug this straight into my audio interface on my computer, record the audio directly into my laptop, and then use the 48V phantom power to power it, so I don't need to muck about with AA batteries in here. And in the future, once budget allows, after buying lots of other stuff I've done recently, I'll probably buy a new audio recorder to upgrade from this, and I'll get one that has an XLR input, so I can plug this straight into it. But what I've got in the meantime, just so I can use this recorder if I do suddenly have an urgent need to film away from my computer and I need to use this recorder, I've picked up this interface, this adapter here. So this is an XLR to 3.5mm cable. And all I can do for this is I can take this, plug the microphone into there like that, locks in really securely, and then I can chuck this into my Zoom recorder. And we'll try this out in a minute. But what I want to do is just do a very quick warning about these cables, because I was chatting to a friend recently who bought a microphone and used one of these with it, and he's probably watching this, so hi. And he had a bit of an issue. So it's worth bearing in mind with these types of XLR to 3.5mm cables that they're not all created equally, and there's 3 different types. And if you're buying from a place like Amazon, like I bought this one, it's an absolute nightmare to work out what type you're actually getting. And if you get the wrong one, you'll have a problem. Now, if you're not interested in this and you just want to get straight to the audio test, feel free to skip ahead. I've put chapters in the video description and put timestamps on the seek bar thing. But it's worth bearing in mind, if you're considering buying these cables, that there's 3 different types. So first thing to note with the XLR connections for microphones is that they're often or usually used for what's called a balanced audio signal. That means that you've got your three connections here, your three wires. One of them is the ground, one of them is called hot, which is the main audio signal from the microphone, and one of them is called cold, which is essentially like the inverse of the audio signal. It's 180 degrees out of phase. And the idea is that any interference imparted on the length of the cable will be imparted on both the hot and the cold. And at the remote end, on the device that's receiving the signal, it can pass that through a special type of amplifier that can use the hot and cold signals that are inverses of each other, combine them, and cancel out the noise. So it means over a longer cable run, you get less interference. And that's why it's used on a lot of professional microphones. Now what that means is it's carrying a mono signal, and then it's going into a 3.5mm jack. Now the simplest type of these adapters you'll get, the ones that will definitely work with a microphone like this, that's using a balanced signal, is where it goes to a mono 3.5mm jack, so one that's just got a single line on it. And that will all it'll have at one end will be a ground connection and an audio connection, and that'll be connected up to the ground and the hot on the XLR end. And that'll work, but there's a downside with that, because what it'll do is it'll only output audio to the left channel. If you're recording into a mono recorder or an external audio recorder you can set to a mono mode, or you're editing and you remember to go and set all your audio files to be mono, that's fine, because the cable will record onto the left channel of a stereo recorder, and then you can set that in your editing software to send that left channel to both the left and right channels, so you get essentially the same mono signal coming out of both speakers. However, the risk with that is if you forget to do that, or you're doing something like plugging this straight into a camera, what you can end up doing is record the audio only onto the left channel, and if you forget to edit that later, or just don't want to edit it later, you'll end up with the audio only coming out the left speaker. And you've probably come across videos on YouTube where that's happened, where the audio only comes out one speaker. And it's usually because someone's using a mono microphone connected into a stereo recorder, and they've not changed it later to send the sound to both channels. So that's where a cable like this comes in. You'll notice that the one I have is still a mono XLR on one end for a balanced signal, but at the other end you've got a stereo jack, so it's a TRS, you've got three conductors on it. And now if you look at the wiring diagram which comes on the box, you can see that what it's doing is the ground is connected to both the ground and hot on the XLR connector, the ground and cold on the XLR connector, so we're just connecting that cold inverse signal to ground, we're not using it. And then the hot from the XLR connector, the actual audio signal, is being sent to both the left and right channels on the 3.5mm jack. And that's what we need for this sort of microphone. We connect this in, and what it'll do is it'll just totally ignore that cold inverse signal, and then into my audio recorder it'll connect the ground, and it'll send the same audio signal to the left and right channels. And that means that even if I connect this to a stereo recorder and record as a stereo audio file, the same audio track will end up on both the left and right channels and come out of both speakers at the same level. So that's absolutely fine. The third type of these is one my friend had an issue with, which is designed for a weird type of microphone, which is a stereo microphone that uses a single XLR cable. There's a few of them on the market, but I'm not sure how standard they are. But essentially it's a microphone that's obviously stereo. It's got two different microphones in it for left and right channel, and it sends them out over a single XLR cable. So rather than a balanced signal like this, where you have the hot, cold and ground, it's an unbalanced stereo signal. So you've got the three wires where you've got ground, left and right. And with a cable designed for those microphones, it'll look exactly the same. You'll have your XLR connector on here, and you'll have your stereo 3.5mm jack on here. But rather than being wired like this one, where both the same audio signal from the hot terminal here is routed to the left and right channels on this, what it'll instead do is it'll have the left and right channels from the XLR connector routed to the left and right channels on the 3.5mm jack. That works great if you're using one of those stereo microphones. But what if you use one of those with a mono balanced microphone, which is what my friend was doing? The issue with that is what you'll do is on one of your audio is you'll end up sending the hot to one of the audio channels and the cold signal to the other audio channel. And you'll record those as a stereo signal where one channel is the inverse of the other one. So your left and right speakers will be out of phase. And that will sound really weird. What I'll do now is I'll try and emulate this. But what that means is the different speakers are out of phase. So when one of the cones on one speaker is pushing out, the other one's pulling back in, and vice versa. This means that the audio waves are almost cancelling each other out, which is why it becomes quite hard to place the sound, and as you move your head around, the sound kind of changes, because the audio waves are cancelling each other out. So that's the first problem with using something like that, because your audio channels end up out of phase, and it just sounds like a really weird end result, and it just sounds terrible. The other issue with that is when you're actually editing, you can come into an issue, for example, where you try and merge that stereo signal where the channels are out of phase into a mono signal. And if you do that, what will happen is it'll try and combine those left and right channels, which are out of phase, and they'll cancel each other out, and you won't get any sound at all. The sound waves basically just cancel each other out, and you'll end up with nothing on the output channel. So you've got to be very careful with that, because if you use one of those cables, you can fix it, but what you basically have to do is take one of the channels, your left or right channel, whichever one's the hot, and then split that to apply to both left and right channels on your output file, which is just more editing, and it's really no benefit over using a cable that goes to an actual mono jack. So it's worth bearing in mind with these. If you're buying one of these cables and you're using it for this sort of microphone, a mono balanced microphone, make sure you get one that routes the hot signal to both the left and right jack, and then links the cold just to ground. What I'll do is I'll put a link to this one in the description so you can buy the exact one that I've got, because I know this one works, but it's worth being extremely careful, because this one here is also available in a variant for stereo microphones, where it has the separate left and right channels, or would cause an issue with a unbalanced microphone. And the only difference is the model number. This is the XVM102F. The M, I think, means mono for this, because the other version is the XVS102F, and I presume the S means stereo. So it's really easy to get the wrong one because the model numbers are so close and they look absolutely identical. So yeah, I've put a link in the description for this particular cable I've got. So if you are trying to do something like this is probably the one to go for, or at least one that's wired the same as this. Of course, if you get one that's fairly easy to remove, like this one just got a screw to take the XLR jack apart, if you did get the wrong one and you could get it open, you could still obviously open it up and resolder it and fix it, but yeah, it's worth bearing that in mind if you're buying these cables. Don't just go based purely on site, and just be careful with sites like Amazon where it's really hard to buy a cable because they just describe things really badly. Okay, so now let's try this out. So I'll do a few different audio tests. The first test I'll do is what I'll be doing for most of my videos, where I plug this XLR connection into my Behringer audio interface and then record the audio directly into my laptop. For now I'll just use Audacity because that's what I'm familiar with, but I'll see if there's better software out there, and if anyone has any recommendations of software that would work a bit like this, where it just start and stop recording and it saves different files, that would be ideal. But yeah, I'll just plug this into my audio interface and record into that. So now let's try this out. What you're hearing now is the audio recorded through the Zoom H2n recorder, but what I've done for this section is I've turned off any sort of EQ or compression or anything I do to the audio. Normally I do a bit of manipulation to the audio after the fact, so this will probably sound a little bit different because this is the raw audio off of the recorder, because I don't want to be having any filtering or EQing when I'm doing a microphone test, because there'll be different EQing stuff I'll do for each microphone. So right now you're hearing the Giant Squid, just the audio raw from the Giant Squid recorded into the Zoom H2n recorder. Now here we've got the laptop connected to the audio interface and I've got Audacity open, so we can plug the Sony microphone in. So plug that into the interface here. I've switched on phantom power at the back, so it's got this little 48 volt light on the front, that little red light. That's powering the microphone. The battery currently isn't in the microphone. And then we can hit record. So what you're now hearing is the audio coming through the Sony microphone. And hopefully it sounds pretty good. It definitely seemed to sound really good in the testing I've done. Now, obviously this isn't fully scientific because the Sony audio is being recorded through a Behringer interface and the Giant Squid audio is being recorded into the Zoom H2n recorder. But unfortunately I can't test them side by side really, because the Zoom only has one input and the Behringer interface doesn't support plug-in power, so it won't do the Giant Squid microphone. But they're decent, they're both decent interfaces or recorders, so hopefully the sound quality is vaguely comparable. So now we'll flip back the Giant Squid microphone, which you can hear with what you're listening to now, and that's going into the Zoom H2n recorder. And it's still a really good microphone, and for £50 or whatever it costs, it's really good value. But if we flip back to the Sony, we can now hear Sony quality, and it just sounds really, really good. I've done a bit of listening between the two of them, and they both sound really similar. But what it seems to be is the Giant Squid seems a little bit harsher in the high end, and I find it a little bit more tiring or fatiguing to listen to. Whereas when we go over to the Sony, it just sounds a little bit more neutral. It doesn't sound quite as harsh in the high end, but still has a really good frequency response and you can still hear a lot of stuff. So it's a little bit less tiring to listen to. Now overall, they're both really good microphones, but the sound quality of the Sony really impressed me. Okay, so now let's try this out with the Zoom H2n recorder. So currently using Giant Squid as I've been using for the most of this video, but now let's switch over to the Sony. So I've got the Sony clipped onto me already. So we've got the microphone here, so we need to stick the battery in it, of course, because this won't power it. It doesn't do phantom power. Let's pop that open, chuck the AA in, and then screw this back on. I would definitely like to see some sort of on-off switch on this because it's a bit of a pain I'm taking the battery in and out, but then again, can't accidentally switch it off, which is quite nice. So now what we need to do is plug that in there, like that, and then we can connect it into the recorder. So I'll mute obviously any popping, but let's swap over. And you're now listening to the Sony. Now the gain's obviously level's a bit lower out the Sony, so I'll turn the gain up a little bit. And there we go. That's now the Sony ECM-77B recording into the Zoom H2n. So what I'll do now is I'll go and do a test where I'll flip between the different microphones. So I've got an audio sample recorded into the Behringer interface into my laptop. I've got an audio sample of the Giant Squid recording to the Zoom H2n. And I've got an audio sample of the Sony recording into the H2n. And I'm saying basically the same thing in them all. So what I'll do is I'll flip through them all, so I'll play them all one after the other, and I'll almost go back, so I'll do it so you can compare the transition point between the Giant Squid into the Zoom H2n, the Sony into the H2n, the Sony into the Behringer, and then back to the Giant Squid. So you can I'll flip through all the different audio samples, putting a bit of text on the screen to say what you're listening to, and you can compare the sound quality of all the different options. So you're now listening to the audio recorded through the Giant Squid Audio Lab microphone into the Zoom H2n recorder. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. She sells seashells by the seashore. So you're now currently listening to audio recorded through the Behringer audio interface using the Sony ECM-77B microphone. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. She sells seashells by the seashore. So you're now listening to the Sony ECM-77B recording it into the Zoom H2n recorder. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. She sells seashells by the seashore. So you're now listening to the audio recorded through the Giant Squid Audio Lab microphone into the Zoom H2n recorder. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. She sells seashells by the seashore. So there you go, that was a few audio comparisons. Now you'll have to forgive the lack of video at this part, I'm actually recording this while I'm editing it, just after watching that back fully. And what I noticed is that the Sony does sound quite a bit better than the Giant Squid when the Sony's plugged into the audio interface. However, one thing I did notice is that the Sony sounds quite a bit worse, almost worse than the Giant Squid actually, when it's connected into the H2n recorder using the XLR to 3.5mm cable. So I did a bit of digging into this, and I think I've possibly figured out what it is. When I first connected it, you'll have noticed when I did the test a minute ago, the volume level was a lot lower, and I increased the gain on the H2n. And digging into it a bit more, what it seems to be is that when you split a balanced XLR signal into an unbalanced signal by simply taking the hot and discarding the cold, you reduce the amplitude by half. And what this means is when I'm feeding it into the H2n, I'm having to turn the gain up quite a bit to get the same volume level. And that's probably just pushing the preamps in the H2n a little bit harder, and it's just reducing the signal quality a little bit. Whereas when you connect a balanced microphone to a proper balanced input, what that does is it feeds it into what's called a differential amplifier, which takes the hot and cold signals, inverts the cold, which puts it in phase with the hot, and then brings the noise that's on the cold out of phase with the noise that's on the hot, and then it sums them together. And what that does is it cancels out the out of phase noise, but then sums the amplitude of the hot and cold together, which gives twice the amplitude on the output. So I think that's what's happening here, is because I'm just discarding the cold and feeding the hot into the H2n, I'm reducing the amplitude by half. So the quality from the H2n is passable. It'll do in a pinch if I need to use a portable recorder with this microphone before I get a new one. But long term, I'll definitely get a new portable recorder that has a native XLR input, and that'll get past that problem entirely, and the Sony will sound great off both the audio interface and the external recorder. Now another test I did while editing, so I do apologise, there's no video for it. But what I've done is I've recorded the Sony microphone into the Behringer interface, running purely on battery power, running on phantom power but with the battery installed, and running on phantom power with the battery removed, just so you can hear a sound quality comparison between them. And while they're all sounding pretty similar, and they all do sound pretty good, at least I seem to think, and it'd be interesting to see if other people feel the same, it does seem to sound better running on phantom power than it does off of a AA. So I'm definitely going to run it on phantom power long term, that's definitely my plan. And I do wonder if different batteries have a different effect on it or whatever, but yeah, I'll play these other sound samples now just so you can really compare them. So here we go. This is the ECM-77B with phantom power switched off. Then this is the ECM-77B with phantom power on but the battery's still in place. And now this is the ECM-77B with the battery removed and phantom power on. So there you go. That's a little sound quality comparison between powering the microphone over a AA battery, phantom power with a AA battery installed, and phantom power with no battery installed. And they do all sound very similar, although it does sound like phantom power has a slight edge, but it's really, really minor. But yeah, this microphone sounds really good, especially when it's plugged into a proper balanced XLR input. It doesn't sound quite as good when it's going into the H2N over that splitter cable, just because we're losing half the amplitude, but that'll be solved when I get a new recorder. So yeah, definitely very happy with the sound quality of this. So there you go, now you've heard the sound quality, and I'm really happy with it. It's not like it's blown my mind or anything, it's not like I'm like, wow, a £500 microphone, that's like something I've never heard before. It's just a really good quality microphone. And when you compare it to the Giant Squid, it sounds, to be honest, quite similar, but it seems a little bit less harsh. It doesn't sound as grating or as like fatiguing to listen to. Now obviously that's very voice dependent as well, so different people sound different on different microphones, but yeah, I'm really happy with the sound quality of this. Now I wouldn't go and pay £500 for this new, that would just be silly. That's the sort of level of, you know, what the target market for this is, broadcasters who can easily afford £500 for a microphone. This isn't really targeted at average, you know, YouTubers or hobbyist filmmakers or anything like that. But if you can pick one of these up used for around about, you know, £80 to £100 or as low as 60, which is what I paid for mine, this could be a very good value option because that brings it in line with microphones like the Giant Squid I'm using right now or the various Rode microphones. And if you can get one of these used, it can be a very good value option. Now the only real disadvantage is just having to deal with this big XLR mess, because obviously compared to a 3.5mm jack, this is just a bit bulkier to deal with. Now the advantage of this is because it's a balanced XLR signal, you can actually extend it. So Sony state that you can extend it I think up to 250 meters, which is obviously really, really good. So you can get a nice big XLR cable and run it really far away from the person that's got the microphone on them and into your recorder or mixer or whatever you're using. But obviously it does mean that this thing here needs to be within 3 meters of the person. But it's not too bad. You could easily hide it in a pocket or, you know, potentially fashion it into like a, you know, belt strap or something like that to keep it out of the way. And even if you wanted the person to have like an audio recorder or mic pack on their person and you're connecting this to it and not using one of the radio mic specific microphones, you could probably still figure it out. For example, you could take something like this, plug it into there, hide this somewhere like on their belt or in their pocket or down their leg, something like that, and then just have a sort of pigtail cable going into the recorder or the transmitter that you're using. So that would definitely work as an option. It's not as convenient as a microphone that just goes into 3.5mm jack, but I can kind of deal with it. It is somewhat annoying because of course in here all you've got is a big microphone or the big battery, and it'd be nice if this was optional, you know, if it was like a separate module you could plug on and you could take this bit off and have a much shorter connector. But it is what it is and it works totally fine. So yeah, as long as you're able to like deal with this bulk of this big XLR battery part, it can be a really good microphone. So there you go, that's a look at my new microphone, the Sony ECM-77B. And it's a very good microphone. Obviously you'd expect that for its new price, but if you can pick this up cheap enough used, it's definitely a very good option. And I can't wait to use this in future videos. Now this is where I'd normally say, oh, there's links in the description to buy it. With this that's a little bit harder because you're very much dependent on what's going to show up on eBay. But it's worth taking a look on eBay, searching for the ECM-77B, and maybe just setting like a saved search just so you can keep an eye on new ones coming out, and just keep an eye on them. And then if you see any auctions come up, chuck a cheap bid on and just see if you can win one, because I've seen these going for very reasonable prices. It's just very much dependent on the auction. The only other thing is obviously this XLR to 3.5mm adapter. I've put a link in the video description if you're interested in this, just because they're kind of tricky to get the right one. So this one that I've linked in the description is the one used for a mono balanced microphone like this and converting it into a stereo 3.5mm jack to go into an audio recorder or camera. So I've linked this cable in the description in case anyone needs something like this, because it's a bit of a nightmare trying to find one of these. But yeah, there you go. Thank you very much for watching.